My parents confessed they've been lying about my siblings' whereabouts for 10 years. The brother I thought was studying abroad in Europe was actually living a nightmare my parents kept hidden for a decade. My name is Harper Mitchell, and I'm 27 years old. For the past 10 years, I've lived with a carefully constructed reality about my older brother, Tyler. According to my parents, Tyler had been pursuing his education abroad, first in London for his undergraduate degree, then in Paris for his master's program. He would occasionally send postcards with beautiful European landmarks, and my parents would proudly display them on our refrigerator. During family gatherings, they would regale relatives with stories of Tyler's academic achievements and his promising future in international business. The narrative was consistent, believable, and became an integral part of our family identity. Growing up, Tyler had always been the golden child. 3 years my senior, he excelled at everything he touched: academics, sports, music, and social relationships. Our parents, particularly our mother, doted on him, seeing in him the fulfillment of their own unfulfilled dreams. I, by contrast, was average in most respects, though I never resented Tyler for it. He was kind to me, protective even, and I looked up to him with genuine admiration. When he graduated high school as valedictorian and received a full scholarship to study abroad, our entire community celebrated. The going-away party was the stuff of local legend, with hundreds of attendees and our father giving an emotional speech about how Tyler would make the family proud on the world stage. The first year of Tyler's supposed European adventure followed the expected pattern. He sent emails detailing his classes, new friends, and cultural experiences. During holidays, he would call, his voice slightly distorted by the poor connection, but full of excitement about his life abroad. My parents would often put him on speakerphone, beaming with pride as Tyler described his academic successes and travel adventures. I remember feeling a mix of envy and pride for my brother, happy for his achievements while wondering if I would ever achieve something so significant in my own life. As the years passed, Tyler's communications became less frequent, but no less celebrated. The postcards continued to arrive at irregular intervals, each one analyzed and discussed at our family dinners. My parents would occasionally mention financial sacrifices they were making to support Tyler's education, but always framed it as a worthy investment in his future. When I started college and struggled with some courses, my mother would sometimes say, "Why can't you be more like your brother? He's managing perfectly well in a foreign country." These comparisons stung, but I accepted them as truth, never questioning the narrative that had become our family's cornerstone. By the time I graduated and started my career as a graphic designer, Tyler had supposedly completed both degrees and was working for an international consulting firm in Paris. His visits home were rare and always explained away by his demanding job and the expense of transatlantic travel. The last time I supposedly saw him was at our grandmother's funeral 3 years ago, though in retrospect his appearance was brief and somewhat shadowy. He wore dark sunglasses indoors and seemed uncomfortable with physical contact, attributes I attributed to grief and jet lag at the time. Now, as I stand in my childhood bedroom preparing for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary party, I find myself reflecting on this carefully constructed family history. The house is filled with framed photos of our family, with Tyler's images prominently displayed. Graduation pictures, supposed European landmarks in the background, and that last awkward photo from Grandma's funeral. Something about these images has always bothered me, a nagging feeling that I've pushed aside for years. But as I straightened a particularly large portrait of Tyler in his supposed graduation cap and gown, I noticed something that changes everything, a detail so small yet so significant that it threatens to unravel the decade of lies our family has built. The detail I noticed in the graduation photograph was subtle but unmistakable. In the bottom right corner of the frame, partially obscured by the ornate gold border, was the logo of a local community college, not any European university, but Northwood Community College, merely 20 minutes from our childhood home. The insignia was small, almost hidden, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. My heart began to race as I examined the photo more closely. Tyler's graduation cap bore no university name, and the background, which I had always assumed was some European campus, now looked suspiciously like the gardens of our local community college. This discovery set off a chain reaction in my mind. All the inconsistencies that I had dismissed over the years suddenly resurfaced with alarming clarity. The postcards, for instance. Tyler had supposedly been sending them from various European cities, yet the postmarks were always smudged or missing entirely. The phone calls from abroad sometimes had background noises that sounded distinctly American, like sirens or specific bird calls I recognized from our region. Even his supposed European accent came and went, something I had attributed to his adaptability, but now seemed suspicious. The anniversary party was in full swing downstairs, but I remained locked in my childhood bedroom, mind racing through a decade of memories and half-truths. I pulled out my phone and began searching online for evidence of Tyler's supposed academic career. Nothing. No records of a Tyler Mitchell graduating from any London university, no enrollment in a Paris master's program, no employment with the international consulting firm my parents had mentioned. The digital footprint of my brother's European success story was completely non-existent. My hands trembled as I continued my search, expanding to include any social media presence or professional profiles. Tyler had always been somewhat private, but the complete absence of any online presence for someone supposedly working in international business was deeply suspicious. I even searched for the supposed consulting firm, only to find that no company with that name existed in Paris or anywhere else in Europe. Downstairs, I could hear my mother laughing, the sound mingling with the clinking of glasses and soft jazz music. The thought of confronting her with my discoveries filled me with dread, but the need for answers outweighed my fear. I needed to know the truth about my brother, wherever that truth might lead. As I descended the stairs, I noticed my parents standing by the fireplace, accepting congratulations from their friends. They looked the picture of parental pride and success, my father in his tailored suit, my mother in an elegant navy dress that brought out the blue in her eyes. They had built a life based on appearances, on maintaining the perfect family image in our small, judgmental community. The realization that this perfect image might be a complete fabrication made me feel both angry and strangely sympathetic. I caught my mother's eye and gestured toward the kitchen. As she followed me, her expression shifted from polite hostess to concerned parent. The moment we were alone, away from the prying eyes and ears of their guests, I showed her the photograph with the community college logo. Her face went pale, and for a moment I thought she might faint. She composed herself quickly, however, her features hardening into a mask I had never seen before. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been hanging in my room for years," I replied, my own voice shaking slightly. "Mom, where has Tyler really been all this time?" Before she could answer, my father entered the kitchen, his smile faltering when he saw the tension between us. He followed my mother's gaze to the photograph in my hand, and his face mirrored the same panic I had seen in hers moments earlier. The three of us stood there in silence, the sounds of the party continuing just beyond the kitchen door, a surreal backdrop to the moment our family's carefully constructed reality began to crumble. The anniversary party continued as my parents led me to the small study at the back of the house, closing the door firmly behind us. The room was filled with leather-bound books and family photographs, including several more images of Tyler in supposed European settings. Now that I knew what to look for, I could spot the inconsistencies in each photo, the wrong kind of street signs, clothing that didn't match the supposed seasons, backgrounds that looked suspiciously like local landmarks. My father locked the door, a gesture that felt both dramatic and necessary given the bombshell that was about to drop. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather armchairs while he and my mother took the sofa opposite me. For several moments, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the muffled laughter and music from the party and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, my mother broke the silence, her voice strained. "Harper, there's something you need to know about Tyler, about where he's really been these past 10 years. My father placed a hand on her arm as if to steady her. "We wanted to protect you," he said, looking directly at me for the first time since entering the room. "We wanted to protect everyone." What followed was a confession so staggering that it took me several moments to process its implications. Tyler had never gone to Europe at all. The supposed academic career was a complete fabrication, a story my parents had constructed to explain his prolonged absence. The truth was far more complicated and painful than I could have imagined. According to my parents, Tyler had developed a serious addiction to prescription opioids in his final year of high school, initially after being prescribed pain medication for a sports injury. What started as legitimate medical use had spiraled into dependency, and by the time he should have been leaving for college, he was already in the grip of a full-blown addiction. The scholarship to study abroad was real, but Tyler had never used it. Instead, he had entered his first rehabilitation program just weeks after his high school graduation. The first few years were a cycle of rehabilitation, relapse, and more rehabilitation. My parents, unable to face the shame and stigma of addiction in our community, had constructed the European story as a shield. They had used the scholarship money to fund Tyler's treatments, supplementing it with their savings when necessary. The postcards were purchased online and occasionally mailed by family friends who were actually traveling to Europe. The phone calls were sometimes real, with Tyler calling from various treatment facilities, but often they were staged, with my parents pretending to talk to him while he was actually in no condition to speak. As my mother spoke, tears streaming down her face, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger at the deception, pity for my brother's struggles, and a profound sense of loss for the relationship I thought I had with both my brother and my parents. The golden child I had idolized had been fighting a demon I knew nothing about, while my parents had carried this burden alone, choosing appearance over honesty. The most shocking revelation was yet to come. My father explained that after 5 years of failed treatments and deteriorating health, Tyler had disappeared during a relapse period, disappearing for nearly 8 months. During this time, he had lived on the streets, homeless and addicted, while my parents searched desperately for him. They had considered telling me the truth then, but by the time they found him, emaciated, sick, and ready to try again, the deception had gone on for so long that continuing it seemed easier than coming clean. The final piece of the puzzle was the most devastating of all. 2 years ago, Tyler had been arrested for attempting to purchase prescription drugs illegally. He had served 18 months in prison, a period my parents had explained to me as Tyler taking an intensive internship in a remote part of France. He had been released 6 months ago and was currently living in a halfway house, working part-time and attending recovery meetings. As my parents finished their confession, the grandfather clock struck midnight, signaling the end of their anniversary party. We could hear guests beginning to depart, their cheerful goodbyes a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere in the study. I looked at my parents, really seeing them for the first time, not as the perfect couple who had raised 2 successful children, but as flawed human beings who had made a terrible choice out of love and fear. The revelation of my brother's decade-long struggle with addiction and my parents' elaborate cover-up left me reeling. In the days following their confession, I found myself moving through a fog of disbelief and anger. The anniversary party had ended awkwardly, with my parents putting on brave faces as they saw their guests out, while I remained hidden in the study, grappling with the magnitude of their deception. The following morning, the house felt strangely quiet after the previous night's festivities. My parents had left early, leaving a note saying they needed to attend to some urgent matters. I suspected they were actually going to see Tyler, a realization that filled me with a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to go with them, to finally see my brother after 10 years of separation based on lies. Another part of me felt so betrayed that I couldn't imagine facing any of them. Instead, I began my own investigation, determined to piece together the real timeline of my brother's life over the past decade. My parents had given me the broad strokes, but I needed details. I needed to understand how they had maintained such an elaborate deception for so long, and more importantly, I needed to understand my brother's journey. My first stop was the community college, whose logo I had discovered in the graduation photograph. A visit to the admissions office revealed that Tyler had indeed enrolled there briefly in the fall after his high school graduation, but had withdrawn after only 6 weeks. The registrar, remembering my brother due to his promising academic record and sudden departure, confirmed that he had left citing personal reasons and had requested that his records be sealed. From there, I visited several rehabilitation centers in the area, using the names my parents had mentioned during their confession. Most facilities refused to confirm or deny Tyler's presence due to privacy laws, but a former counselor at one center remembered him vaguely. He was a bright kid with a serious problem, she told me during a brief phone conversation. His parents were devoted but seemed more concerned with appearances than with his actual recovery. That's not uncommon in our field, unfortunately. The most difficult part of my investigation was looking into Tyler's time on the streets and his subsequent incarceration. A visit to the county jail confirmed his 18-month sentence for prescription fraud, with release records matching the timeline my parents had provided. The homeless shelter was less cooperative, but a volunteer who had worked there during the period in question remembered a young man matching Tyler's description, intelligent but withdrawn, struggling with addiction but always polite to staff. As I gathered these fragments of truth, I found my anger gradually giving way to a profound sense of sadness. My brother had been living a nightmare while I was building my career, maintaining friendships, and living a relatively carefree life. The guilt was overwhelming, even though rationally I knew I wasn't responsible for what had happened. My parents returned home that evening, looking exhausted and worried. They had clearly expected me to be gone, perhaps to have retreated to my own apartment to process everything. Instead, I had spread the documents I had collected across the dining room table, a visual representation of their decade of deception. For hours, we talked, really talked for the first time in years. My mother broke down repeatedly, describing the pain of watching her eldest son struggle with addiction while maintaining the facade of his European success. My father, usually stoic and composed, admitted that the deception had become a prison of its own, isolating them from friends and family who might have offered support if they had known the truth. It started as a temporary measure, my father explained, his voice heavy with regret. We thought Tyler would overcome his addiction quickly, and then we could tell everyone he had decided to stay in Europe to work. But as the years passed and his struggles continued, the lie took on a life of its own. We were trapped by our own story. My mother added, "Every time we considered telling you the truth, something would happen. Tyler would have a setback, or you would mention how proud you were of your brother, and we would lose our nerve. We convinced ourselves we were protecting you, but really, we were protecting ourselves." As the night wore on, I began to understand the complex web of motivations that had led to their deception. It wasn't just about appearances in the community, though that was certainly a factor. It was also about their inability to accept that their golden child was fallible, that their perfect family narrative had a serious flaw. Their love for Tyler was real, but so was their shame about his addiction. The conversation ended with an agreement that I would meet Tyler the following day at the halfway house where he was living. My parents would arrange it, giving him time to prepare for a reunion that was bound to be emotionally charged. As I went to bed that night, in my childhood room that now felt both familiar and strange, I wondered how my brother would look after 10 years, what he would sound like, and whether we could find a way to rebuild a relationship based on truth rather than illusion. The halfway house was located in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of town, a converted Victorian with peeling paint and a small garden that residents tended to as part of their therapy. As I pulled up to the curb, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. My parents had offered to come with me, but I had insisted on meeting Tyler alone for the first time. This was something I needed to do without intermediaries, without the buffer of their explanations and justifications. A counselor named Marcus met me at the door, a kind-faced man with gentle eyes who seemed to understand the gravity of the moment without needing extensive explanation. He led me to a small sitting area where Tyler was already waiting. The sight of my brother after 10 years was a shock, though not entirely unexpected given what my parents had revealed. The golden child of my memories was gone, replaced by a man who looked older than his 30 years. Tyler was thin, almost gaunt, with tired eyes that held a mixture of apprehension and something else, perhaps relief. His hair was cut short, revealing a small scar above his left temple that I had never seen before. He wore simple clothes, a gray t-shirt and jeans, that seemed incongruous with the sophisticated European wardrobe I had imagined him in all these years. For several moments, we just looked at each other, the silence between us heavy with a decade of separation and deception. I had prepared a speech in my head on the drive over, but all words failed me now. How do you begin to reconnect with a brother whose entire life story has been a lie? Finally, Tyler spoke first, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I guess you know the truth now." The simplicity of his statement caught me off guard. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to justify or explain, just a weary acceptance of the situation. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. "I'm sorry, Harper," he continued, looking down at his hands. "I never wanted things to go this far. At first, I thought I could beat this thing quickly, and then we could tell everyone I had decided to stay in Europe. But addiction doesn't work like that. It's not a problem you solve and move on from. It's something you manage every day for the rest of your life." As he spoke, I found myself studying his face, searching for traces of the brother I had grown up with. They were there, in the shape of his eyes, the way he tucked his hair behind his ear when he was nervous, the familiar cadence of his speech despite the roughness in his voice. This was still Tyler, my brother, albeit a version of him that had been hidden from me for 10 years. Over the next 2 hours, Tyler shared his story with a candor that was both painful and refreshing. He described the initial descent into addiction, starting with legitimate pain medication after a football injury and gradually progressing to doctor shopping and illegal purchases. He talked about the shame and secrecy, the isolation that addiction creates even within a loving family. The worst part wasn't the physical cravings or the financial problems, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was knowing that I was disappointing everyone who believed in me. Mom and Dad had such high expectations, and you looked up to me. The pressure to maintain that image while struggling with something so shameful was overwhelming. He described his multiple attempts at rehabilitation, each one ending in relapse. He spoke candidly about his 8 months on the streets, a period he described as both terrifying and strangely liberating. "For the first time, I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't," he explained. "I was just another addict, another homeless person. There was a certain freedom in hitting rock bottom, in having nothing left to lose." The most difficult part of his story was his time in prison, which he described as a wake-up call. "It was hell, but it was also what I needed," he admitted. "There was no access to drugs, no escape. I had to face myself, to accept who I had become and decide who I wanted to be. I worked in the prison library, read everything I could get my hands on about addiction and recovery. I wrote letters I never sent, to you, to Mom and Dad, trying to explain what had happened." As Tyler spoke, I felt my anger and resentment gradually melting away, replaced by a profound sense of empathy. This wasn't the golden child who had abandoned his family for a glamorous life abroad. This was a man who had been fighting a devastating illness while his family maintained a fiction that prevented them from providing real support. When he finished speaking, we sat in silence for a while, the weight of his words settling between us. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the room. I realized that in all these years, I had never really known my brother at all. The person sitting before me was both familiar and strange, a combination of the boy I had grown up with and the man who had survived a decade of addiction, homelessness, and incarceration. "I want to get to know you again," I finally said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "The real you, not the fictional European student." Tyler looked up, and for the first time, a genuine smile touched his lips. "I'd like that," he replied softly. "I'd like that a lot." The weeks following my reunion with Tyler were both challenging and transformative. I began visiting him regularly at the halfway house, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just sitting with him in the garden as he tended to the tomato plants. These initial meetings were awkward at times, filled with long silences as we navigated the unfamiliar territory of a relationship built on truth rather than fiction. During these visits, Tyler shared more details about his journey through addiction and recovery. He explained the concept of triggers, people, places, and emotions that could spark cravings, and the strategies he had learned to manage them. He spoke of the daily discipline required to maintain sobriety, the constant vigilance that replaced the spontaneity I had always associated with him. I learned about the 12-step program he was attending, not as a religious convert, but as someone who had found structure and community in its principles. He showed me the journal he kept, filled with reflections on his progress, his setbacks, and his hopes for the future. Reading his words gave me insight into the mind of an addict, not the stereotypical depiction I had seen in movies, but the complex reality of a person struggling with a chronic illness while trying to rebuild a life. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents continued to evolve. The initial anger I felt toward them had softened into a more nuanced understanding of their motivations, though I still struggled with the years of deception. We had several difficult conversations about their choices, about the culture of shame that have led them to hide Tyler's addiction rather than seek support. It's not just about reputation, my mother admitted during one particularly emotional discussion. It was about our inability to accept that our son was flawed. We had built such an image of Tyler, of our family, that admitting the truth felt like a failure not just of parenting, but of character. My father added, every time we told the lie, it became easier. The more time passed, the more we had to lose by telling the truth. We dug ourselves into a hole so deep that we couldn't see a way out without causing even more damage. These conversations were painful but necessary, peeling back layers of denial and rationalization that had protected our family image at the cost of our integrity. I found myself forgiving them not because their actions were justified, but because I understood the fear and shame that had driven those actions. The most challenging aspect of this new phase of our family life was reintegrating Tyler into our social circle. My parents had maintained the fiction of his European success for so long that explaining his sudden return required careful navigation. We decided on a partial truth, that Tyler had been dealing with health issues and had decided to return home to recover and be closer to family. Some friends and relatives accepted this explanation without question, while others seemed skeptical. The most rewarding responses came from those who, sensing there was more to the story, simply offered support without prying. My mother's sister, my Aunt Carol, pulled me aside during one family gathering and said quietly, "Whatever's going on, we're here for you all. No judgment." These moments of genuine connection made me realize how much my parents had sacrificed by maintaining their deception. In their effort to present a perfect family image, they had denied themselves the comfort and support that comes from vulnerability and honesty. As summer turned to fall, Tyler reached several important milestones in his recovery. He celebrated 6 months of sobriety, obtained a part-time job at a local bookstore, and began taking classes at the community college where he had briefly enrolled all those years ago. He moved from the halfway house to a small apartment nearby, a step toward independence that was both exciting and terrifying for all of us. I helped him furnish his new apartment, shopping at thrift stores and flea markets for the essentials he would need to start over. As we assembled a mismatched collection of furniture in his small living room, I felt a sense of normalcy that had been absent from our relationship for a decade. We were just siblings setting up a new home, a common enough experience that felt extraordinary given our history. One evening, as we sat on his newly acquired sofa eating pizza and watching a movie, Tyler turned to me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about how to make amends," he said, "not just to you and Mom and Dad, but to everyone I've hurt over the years. The 12-step program talks about making direct amends where possible, except when to do so would injure them or others." I asked what he had in mind, and he explained that he wanted to eventually share his story more broadly, perhaps through speaking at schools or community centers about the dangers of prescription drug abuse. "I can't change what happened," he said, "but maybe I can help someone else avoid the same mistakes." The sincerity in his voice moved me deeply. This was not the Tyler of my childhood, the seemingly perfect golden child who could do no wrong, but a more complex, more human version who had faced his demons and was determined to create meaning from his suffering. In that moment, I felt a surge of pride in my brother that was more genuine than any I had felt when I believed he was succeeding in Europe. As fall gave way to winter, our family continued to navigate this new reality. There were setbacks, moments of tension, difficult conversations, lingering trust issues, but there was also progress, healing, and the gradual reconstruction of relationships based on honesty rather than illusion. The perfect family image my parents had so carefully cultivated was gone, replaced by something messier but more authentic, a family learning to love and support each other through imperfection and struggle. 2 years have passed since the truth about my brother's whereabouts came to light, and our family has settled into a new normal that bears little resemblance to the carefully constructed narrative we once presented to the world. Tyler has maintained his sobriety, working now as a counselor at the same rehabilitation center where he first sought help. His journey from patient to caregiver has been remarkable to witness, filled with the same dedication and intelligence that characterized his childhood, but now channeled into helping others navigate the difficult path of recovery. My parents, too, have undergone significant transformations. They have become active in local support groups for families of addicts, sharing their story with a candor that once would have been unthinkable. My mother, in particular, has found purpose in advocating for better mental health and addiction services in our community, turning her shame into action. She recently organized a fundraiser that raised enough money to establish a scholarship for individuals seeking treatment who cannot afford it. The most profound change, however, has been in how our family defines success. The European adventure and international career that once represented the pinnacle of achievement have been replaced by more meaningful metrics: days of sobriety, moments of genuine connection, acts of service to others struggling with similar challenges. Our family gatherings, once performances of perfection, are now authentic gatherings where difficult topics are addressed with honesty and compassion. I recently moved back to our hometown, accepting a position at a local marketing firm. The decision surprised some of my college friends, who couldn't understand why I would leave the opportunities of a larger city. What they didn't understand was that my family's journey had reshaped my priorities. The career advancement and financial success that once seemed so important now paled in comparison to the value of being present for the people I loved. Tyler and I have developed a relationship that is deeper and more authentic than anything we shared in childhood. We meet weekly for dinner, sometimes at his apartment, sometimes at mine, sometimes at our parents' home. These gatherings have become sacred spaces where we can be completely ourselves, sharing triumphs and fears without judgment. He has become my confidant, my advisor, and most importantly, my brother, no longer separated by oceans of deception, but connected by the truth of our shared experience. Last month, our family celebrated a new kind of milestone: 10 years since Tyler began his journey to recovery. Unlike the 30th anniversary party that had precipitated the revelation of our family secret, this celebration was small and intimate. Just the four of us, gathered around the dining room table where my parents had finally confessed their decade-long deception. As we ate, my father proposed a toast, not to Tyler's European adventures or fictional achievements, but to his courage, resilience, and the strength he has shown in rebuilding his life. "To our family," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "not the perfect family we pretended to be, but the real family we are becoming." My mother added, "To truth, however difficult it may be to face, and to the healing that only truth can bring." Tyler raised his glass, looking at each of us in turn. "To second chances," he said, "and to the people who never give up on you, even when you've given up on yourself." When it was my turn, I found myself thinking about the photograph that had started this journey of discovery, the graduation picture with the community college logo peeking from the corner. That small detail, almost hidden in plain sight, had unraveled a decade of deception and ultimately led our family to a place of healing and authenticity. "To the cracks in our perfect images," I said, "and to the light that shines through them." The evening ended not with the forced gaiety of the anniversary party 2 years earlier, but with quiet conversation and genuine connection. As I helped my mother clear the dishes, she pulled me aside for a moment. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, "but I'm grateful for the truth, however painful it was to face. The lie was becoming a prison for all of us." Looking back on this journey, I've come to understand that the perfect family image my parents worked so hard to maintain was not just a deception presented to others, but a burden that weighed heavily on each of us. In protecting our reputation, they had denied us the opportunity to grow through adversity, to find strength in vulnerability, to discover that love is not about perfection, but about showing up for each other in our brokenness. Our family story is no longer the tale of a golden child achieving international success while his younger sibling looks on with admiration. It's a more complex narrative about addiction and recovery, deception and truth, shame and redemption. It's a story about the messy, painful, beautiful process of becoming real, not just to others, but to ourselves and to each other. As I write these final words, I'm sitting in Tyler's apartment, watching him prepare for a speaking engagement at a local high school. He's nervous, as he always is before these events, but also determined. He believes that sharing his story might help even one young person avoid the path he took, might encourage even one family to seek help rather than hide their struggles. The European adventure that never happened has been replaced by a different kind of journey, one that doesn't span continents but delves deep into the human heart. It's a journey without postcards from exotic locations or impressive academic credentials, but it's real, it's honest, and it's ours. And in the end, that's more than enough.